Well, here in Israel, the ceasefire has been welcomed by many Jews and Arabs alike. To the right of your screen, you can see celebrations in East Jerusalem, while in the Gaza Strip, an entirely different narrative is unfolding. Hundreds of masked Hamas fighters brandishing assault rifles could be seen parading through Gaza City on Saturday, celebrating their so-called win in a defiant show of strength. But even though the battle has ended, a new one has begun, and that is a fight for the winning narrative. Both Israel and Hamas claim that they've come out on top, and our defense correspondent Jonathan Regev is going to tell you why.
The wars of the past, where one army faced another, had clear winners and clear losers. The wars in which armies fight against terror organizations do not usually end with a conclusive outcome, and once the war ends, both sides try to strengthen their narrative.
When we went out on an operation, I had defined its main goal: to land a hard blow on the terror organizations, to harm their capabilities and restore calm while establishing our deterrence. And that is exactly what we did.
Judging by the numbers, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is absolutely right. The IDF destroyed more than 100 kilometers of the Hamas underground tunnel system. 5 senior Hamas and Islamic Jihad commanders were killed, along with more than 200 of their fighters. Israel was able to destroy a large part of the rocket infrastructure used by the organizations in Gaza, all this while intercepting the vast majority of rockets sent to populated areas, resulting in a very low number of casualties on the home front, only 12 people killed in the entire operation. While all this is true, the other side can also claim victory.
We consider this battle as a quantum leap in the history of the conflict with the enemy. Resistance is the best strategic choice for the liberation and return.
Ismail Haniyeh is not wrong either. His organization was able to fire nearly 4,400 rockets into Israel, a number never even closely seen before. Those rockets triggering more than 7,000 sirens in large parts of the country, more than 600 of them in central Israel. The big cities on the southern coast, Ashdod and Ashkelon, and their surrounding areas, each with 400 sirens. Despite the Israeli constant efforts, Hamas was able to keep some of its underground system, allowing it to constantly continue firing while also keeping its senior political and military officials safe.
All right, I'd like to welcome Rafael Yerushalmi, who's a former IDF intelligence officer. So in your opinion, who won this war? You know, because both Hamas and Israel are tooting their own horns here.
So I think we have to be careful of the language when you speak of military operations. This was not a war, and we're not thinking in terms of victory and defeat. This was an operation led by the military with certain goals. Most of these goals have been achieved. More might have been achieved if the ceasefire would have been delayed, but let's say that 80% of the goals that the IDF set itself when starting this operation have been achieved, like destroying the metro, the cyber, eliminating important military leaders, and mainly the real main goal, rebuilding our image and power of deterrence. This image of deterrence we also wanted to send not only to the Hamas, but also to our other enemies, the Hezbollah and the Iran, and they have received the message.
What's interesting, though, is that Israel's international image seems to have taken a deep dive since the onset of this conflict. Why do you think that Hamas has come out on top as an underdog that the world has been sympathizing for?
Well, simply because the Hamas plays the underdog cards very well, and is very busy losing the war, but winning the mediatic war. On the ground, they lost the war. And our problem with the mediatic war is that we, as I said, have to build back our deterrence. We cannot send an image of victims. We don't want to have an image of victims. We want to have an image of a strong, determined country, discouraging terrorists. Even though we had victims, though our children are traumatized from all these years of being bombed by the Hamas, the image of Israel has to be the image of strength, which is sometimes, unfortunately, misinterpreted abroad as being the giant and they are being the poor little guys.
Now, what's interesting is that a poll came out today from Israel's Channel 12 News asking Israelis how long that they think the quiet with Hamas is actually going to last. And sadly, we saw 24% answer that they think the quiet is only going to last from 1 to 3 years. So what is it going to take to put an end to this violence? Does Israel want Hamas out? out. And, it doesn't seem like Israel has much of a long-term strategy here, especially when we're looking at the civil unrest that's also unfolding in this country.
So you were right to quote the civilian population of Israel, because their common sense and their, unfortunately, habit of the wars make them like generals. They're just as experts. They're right in saying that the ceasefire might not last very long. Also, they're right in mostly wanting to get rid of the Hamas, letting the army go through with its operation until the end. Unfortunately, there is a disagreement here from the population with the political level, with the present government at least, and Mr. Netanyahu, who have a doctrine or a concept that the Hamas should stay in place, at least politically, that it's good to divide the Palestinian autonomy in two, to cut it in two, a decision. That's the whole conception, the same conception that was responsible for the mistakes of the Kippur War. Today, I think the Israelis, they disagree about a lot of things, but I think most Israelis today really believe that we should let the army go to the end of its operation, and that Hamas should be taken away, that in the meantime, the only solution, as said by the Minister of Defense today, is to reinforce the government that's sitting in Ramallah, to reinforce the PLO. It's not the best solution, but at least to have one Palestine and one person to speak to and to negotiate with, and not have this divided Palestine with a government in Ramallah that, would they sign peace with us, would not be able to implement it in Gaza.